Hello and welcome to Miniatures. My name's Stuart and welcome to a Flames of War painting tutorial today. And today's topic is an M4 Sherman from the Hit the Beach starter set. This model has been prepared with a black prime and then a zenithal highlight, so a zenithal prime afterwards. And I'll pop a little link in here now for a little video where I talk all about zenithal priming and underpainting rather than extend the length of this video anymore. But I find it a really useful way of adding colour and depth to the miniatures. What it allows is when thin layers of paint are applied with an airbrush on top afterwards, that it still shows through some of the natural highlight and shade. That's it in a very kind of short term really. If you don't like to do this stage or you don't have an airbrush, you can skip the first part and just sort of you use a coloured spray from a rattle can or something like that. The later parts of the tutorial will completely work with that method as well. So we'll start off using model colour US Olive Drab through the airbrush. And the goal here really is not to be too thick, so I thin this with water, standard water, about 50-50, and just going on with very thin layers. And hopefully what you'll see there is some of the natural highlight showing through and leaving some of the shadow in. Next up is a 50-50 mix of the same US Olive Drab and Green Brown, both from model colour. And this gives you your highlight. So I'm just reinforcing the subtle highlight that's already there from the pre-highlight. And this just kind of really builds in that little bit of texture and just adds a little bit more tone to the paint job itself. And you'll notice that I'm using the same method for the turret as well. I'm not worried about it hitting the tracks or anything else, and I'm not worried about it hitting the driver or the commander's uniform either, because it's very similar. I can just highlight up from that later on. Next up, I'm using some Citadel contrast, funny enough, through the airbrush. Now this is undiluted. Some contrast paints for certain applications are may dilute. This I didn't in this instance. I'm doing very thin layers, and I'm using this to reinforce the shadow. And because it's quite a grimy colour as well, it works sort of doubly to add a little bit of natural colouring around where the dirt might be as well. Now in the past I would have used maybe some inks to do this, but this is one of the new contrast colours, and it's just really good and very easy to use and very easy to clean through the airbrush afterwards, and it just worked really well with this colour scheme. You'll notice here that I actually decide to airbrush in the tracks with this as well. It's nice to work from a brownish base on tracks anyway, and this just really helped save some time. Then I continued with the same colour onto the turret and also on the barrel of the gun itself, just a little bit darker towards the turret itself, and then a little bit darker near the end, sometimes where the heat build up. It just adds a little bit of variation and tone to the model. And there we are, that is the base green down. So we have full shadow and highlights. There's multiple tones there from using 3 colours only. And the pre-highlight helped a little bit with that, but I'm pretty happy with the base we've got down there. Now here I've got some Citadel Greys here, but you could use any light grey really, or even a white. And the aim for this really is just to paint in the face and the hands, ready to take a contrast colour. Now you'll see why I've done that. So I'm going to use Contrast Ghoul Grunter Fur, which is a lovely kind of reddish leathery colour, and I'm going to be painting in on the handles of the weapons and on the top of the hat, basically all the areas that I just painted in with that grey colour. So basically just picking out all of the bits that needed to be a wood or brown or skin colour, and here I am applying it to the top of the leather hat as well. And now for the contrast Fire Slayer Flesh. I'm just quickly apply that to the face and the hands, and we're pretty much good to go. I will do a very basic highlight of those later on. Now, contrast Black Legion. This is the newer black colour in the contrast range, and I'm just blocking out the areas that are going to be black. So there's not much. We're talking about the gun at the top, the machine gun, and then there's some areas on the tank as well. So they're like the road wheels and little bits like that. You can leave those if you're also going to be heavily weathering them. Now, because of the colours underneath, and this is a contrast paint, it does actually give you a little bit of natural highlight. The green does show through a little bit, but I will give it a slight dry brush later on. And as mentioned, just using a little bit of black on the visible areas of the wheels there. Back to the Garrick Sewer, that's the brown colour that I airbrushed in for shade earlier, and I'm just picking out areas of the tracks that I didn't get with the airbrush because I was worried about going over onto the green where I didn't want it, and painting over the spare track on the front of the tank itself. Right, now it's time for Decals. I'm going to pop a little link in the show now so you can click on that, and there's a small tutorial about how I apply Decals. But essentially I need to apply a gloss coat varnish now in order to do this and to protect from the later weathering. Now, for the first stage of the weathering itself, I'm going to be using Scale 75's Soilworks oil wash, and it's just a pre-made oil wash. Now, I often make my own oil washes, usually with raw or burnt umber and artist white spirit, but in this case I'm just going to be using it out of the pot. Give it a quick shake and it's great, and I'm doing a recess wash, really adding it into the darker areas. I'm just building up a little bit of natural shadow. If it pulls, I can wipe it away with a clean brush, and then I'll tidy it up with a little bit of clean white spirit and a brush afterwards. It's always good to have a cotton bud or Q-tip if you're American on hand as well, just to take away any pooling. The good thing about oils is they take a long time to dry fully, so even if you leave it 12-24 hours and you come back with some white spirit, you can remove the most of it. You'll see I also take some time to go around the tracks and the wheels. A little bit more liberal there, let the oil wash really kind of get into all the crevices. Not only will it create the shadow when it dries, it will give a really nice weathered, dirty look as well. So next up is that clean up stage with the artist white spirit. You can use any white spirit, but artist stuff is a lot less, has a lot less odour than the stuff that you might find at a hardware store. And you really don't want if you're painting inside, you don't want to upset your other half or your kids or your pets with the strong smell of kind of DIY style white spirit if you can help it. So the artist stuff's much better for that. But I'm just taking it off where it's pooled in areas, taking it back in the areas where it's flat and it wouldn't have too much there, and also just adding in some natural streaks. By streaking away in a clean way, it often leaves just little faint marks where your sort of rainwater and things would run. So moving my brush in a downward motion will mean that when it does dry, there will be very subtle weathering already built in at this stage. Now it's time to take the weathering up a notch, and I'm going to use some AK dirt and dust deposits. This set comes with 3 in, but I'm going to be using the brown earth deposit. Now you'll see me placing it in areas where dust and dirt may get caught, so in crevices, around rivets, parts of machinery and tools and things on there. Basically anywhere that dirty water and dust and mud and things may get stuck. I just slowly build it up, try to put as thin a line as possible, but I'm going to go back and remove an awful lot of this with white spirit afterwards as well. There are water soluble products out there. In fact, there's 1,000,001 products for weathering these days, but I'm quite used to using oil paints and using these sort of ready mixed weathering powder white spirit mixtures, which are essentially what this is, I believe. So I'm adding it in all over the place, into the crevices on the spare tracks, and basically any little crevice at all. I'll put some on the tracks itself, and I'll also paint in some streaks down the side where water may have run, maybe rain, and it's washed it away slightly, leaving streaks in. Now this is where the magic comes along. So the stuff dries pretty quickly, so I was able to do this straight away. But with a clean brush and clean white spirit, I just go in and start taking it away where I've added too much, thinning down the streak lines so they look a bit more natural. And you're just able to slowly feather away, blend bits out a little bit, and just tidy up those lines and get that downward motion back into it. Now I want to add another colour in there, something a little bit darker, so I'm going to use some AK rust streaks. I don't want the tank to look too rusty, but I definitely wanted to add something that wasn't just the dirt and dust. And there's a number of different products I use. This is the one I chose for this tank, and will be for my project for these Shermans for Flames of War. So it works almost exactly the same way as the dust deposits, painting on very, very thin lines, and then I'm going to use white spirit to thin them out and control them afterwards. If you didn't want to use any of these weathering powders that require white spirits and chemicals like that, streaks you can paint in quite well with inks. Watered down contrast paints work very, very well for this, and even just watered down paints you can do quite well, but you just have to work that little bit quicker, and it's not quite as forgiving if you make a mistake and you can't kind of play around with it quite so much afterwards. So once that's all dry to the touch, it's time to come in and start doing a little bit of dry brushing. And that's scale 75 black metal. It's a very, very dark metal, gunmetal style colour. Now the weapons here are blued, so I don't want them to look too shiny and silver. I'm using a very old brush as a bit of a fine dry brush tool here, rather than one of my bigger dry brushes. And I'm very, very, very gently just hitting the edges just to create a little bit of texture. And I'll also do the same then around the edges of the tracks a little bit, and just a few other areas on the tank itself. So contact areas, so on the sides of armor panels, on the sides of the wheels and things. Just go around gently adding areas where wear and tear would wear away the paint slightly on the edge. And then as a slightly brighter highlight to that, Game Air Silver. Now I'm not going to go and do the gun with this. That is a blued weapon, as I already said. I don't want to look too shiny, but I am going back and picking out some of the edges of the wheels where they're going to hit rocks and things on the road, and some of that bare metal might be a little bit more visible. It also does the job that maybe doing an edge highlight would do on a tank. I just think it looks quite nice and worn and really brings out the definition. I won't put as much of this on. Looks like I'm going everywhere there, but I'm being very, very light and a little bit sparing with it. I'll just hit a few edges again of armor plates and things, and maybe where rivets are and bits of equipment, just to build in that 3D model a little bit more, and it just really, really makes the detail pop. Right, next up we're going to highlight the flesh, and this is Vallejo Noctura range fairy flesh. I'm just going in and highlighting some of the extremities, so fingers, nose, cheekbones, etc. after that contrast base layer. And then the same thing but with flat earth, and I'm going to be using that on the leather hat again. Just a couple of little highlights here and there, really just to pick it out. Now with Contrast Black Legion, I'm just going to go in and paint his goggles, which I believe the model is wearing. It's quite hard to tell. The most detailed, but it looked good when I did it anyway. Now some model colour khaki. I'm going to use that to add highlights to the jacket. So remember I said we're going to keep it with the same base layers as I painted the tank with, because the uniform is close enough that for it to work. It meant that I could paint the tank with the crewman already attached. I know a lot of people would add it afterwards, but again, it's just a time-saving thing for army painting here, and a few subtle line highlights here in the top areas, and it looks absolutely perfect for a crewman in this 15mm scale. Next up, we're going to do some sponge chipping, so using Citadel Rhinox hide, some tweezers and a bit of foam torn from a blister pack, and we just dip the sponge into the brown paint, take most of it off on a bit of paper towel, test it on the paper towel on the edge so you can see what size marks you're going to make, and then very, very gently just go around and add a few marks. So rather than bright chips, these look like sort of a brownish colour, which adds a little bit of depth. So it could be mud, could be just where paint's chipped away slightly but not gone all the way down to the bare metal. Now some Vallejo thick mud effects. Now this is European mud. Now the thick mud isn't like the basing texture. They do something called earth texture as well, which is like your Citadel Sterling mud style stuff. So this stuff is more of an effect, I believe. Now you can obviously use it thick enough to cover a whole base, but I think it works much better as an addition to an earth texture. And for a model like a tank, you can just paint this stuff straight onto the tracks around the edges of the model, and maybe even underneath a little bit as well, just to show where it's picked up mud, what's dried on there. And there we are, that's it done. Hopefully you think it looks good. I'm very happy with it. I absolutely love painting tanks, and I was pretty happy the way this came out. And hopefully you can see that it's relatively simple processes. The hardest part, if you're new to doing this kind of thing, is probably learning the airbrush stages at the beginning. But I would definitely recommend it if you haven't tried it already. However, like I said at the beginning, you could use a coloured spray. There's plenty of army coloured sprays out there these days. So if you got an olive drab coloured spray and then follow the rest of the tutorial, it would work very, very well. A coloured spray and then using a wash afterwards, as long as you were very careful to remove it before it pulled, you could still have a very similar effect, and then follow the rest of the tutorial, all the weathering techniques and things, which I think are a lot easier than people realise. I followed all of the placement for decals and things from the Colours of War book, from Battlefront and from Vallejo, which is an absolutely fantastic companion for Flames of War players and other World War II gamers if you haven't seen it already. So I definitely recommend picking that up if you haven't got it. It definitely helped me know which colours I needed to use, and also know which decals to put there without having to do too much internet searching. If you have enjoyed the video, there is more Flames of War stuff on there at the moment, including a bit of a project vlog that's up to 4 videos now. At the beginning, I wasn't aware that it was going to be a Flames of War vlog, and it started as something else. So if you were a little bit confused, if you go back to vlog 1 wondering what's going on there, bear with me. It all becomes clear in vlog 3 and definitely by vlog 4. So if you've enjoyed the video, please give us a like. That really, really helps out, and consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.